Well, it's great to be with you again, and I've just been surveying Aaron and Graham and Pauline. You're going to go to the front seats.
Yeah, we are. We're going to be obedient.
Good work.
How do you make me feel? Oh, come on up. I'll let you my husband. No, you haven't. I tried to. He goes too. Sorry, dear.
That's okay. How many of you were here last time? Okay. Do you remember me telling you a story about Miss Thompson? No?
You want to tell it again?
Yes.
For those who weren't here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to tell it to you now, but I just wanted to check. But it's a great story, and if it's worth telling once, it's worth telling again. So, let me ask you a question tonight. Who is responsible for you being as healthy as possible?
Ourselves.
Are you sure?
Look
Not,
after yourself.
not the government?
We're
No?
responsible for our health.
Okay. Not the doctor?
No.
Okay.
Well, we're not totally responsible. We're all responsible for ourselves.
Okay, so we're all responsible for ourselves. And who do you think is responsible for you continuing to grow in all aspects of life?
Our faith.
Ourselves?
Our faith.
Our faith? It's true that the choices we make today determine the stories that are told about us tomorrow. In fact, in the last 4 weeks, I've had the privilege of doing 5 funerals and a wedding. There's a movie about something like that, isn't there? Or it's 4 weddings and a funeral. I've had 5 funerals and a wedding in the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Wow.
And I had a funeral this morning for one of our neighbours who died at 85, and it was amazing to hear the stories that people around the room were telling about him. And the choices that you make today, and I make today, determine the stories that will be told about you tomorrow, or that you'll be able to tell about yourself. So the choices that we make today are really important, so we need to choose wisely. And tonight we're thinking about leading ourselves and then helping others to lead themselves. Leading ourselves and leading others to lead self. Leadership, first and foremost, is not a position or a job title. You might have the title of leader, but it doesn't mean that you will lead well. You might have the title at work or at school or at university or at church, but the title doesn't necessarily mean that you'll lead well. And effective leaders start by leading themselves well. And we could think about a definition of leadership. Well, let me ask you, what do you think is the definition of leadership? If someone said to you, what is leadership, what would you say? Don't all talk at once, please. Sorry? Teacher? Yep.
Setting an example.
Setting an example?
And someone who others willingly follow.
Okay. Because you're not a leader if you look behind and no one's following, are you? Yep. A guide.
Someone who can delegate.
Yep.
Knowing where you're going and why.
Yeah. Really important. Someone has said that leadership is influence, and anybody has the opportunity to influence others. You don't have to have the title leader to influence others. Tonight, we'll be encouraging you around the fact that leading ourselves well means that we need to know ourselves well. We need to know our purpose and have a vision of where we're going and act according to our values. Now, I think I'm coming back in about 2 months' time, and that night we're going to be looking at what are your values and how to live authentically as a leader. But leading yourself means taking accountability for yourself, your work and your life. And accountability is a willingness to own the results of your choices. and actions and inactions and behaviours and thoughts and communication and attitude. An accountable person doesn't waste time blaming somebody else for what's going on. So accountability is a really important aspect, and leading yourself well demonstrates a self-awareness through knowing yourself, having an accurate assessment of who you are, and the management of your attitudes. Knowing yourself or leading yourself well also is important to understand how you impact others in what you do. Leading self happens most effectively when we know ourselves, when we follow Jesus, because he knows us better than anyone else and he can guide us, and when we're in step with and empowered by the Spirit of God. But it also involves being in life-giving relationships with others. You know, the community of the church can be both a support but also act as a mirror and feed back to us some of the things and areas where we need to be growing. I've been a pastor for about 48 years. I know I don't look that old, but I am. And one of the things that I've said to our staff team or our leaders or our church publicly is, if you identify any area of my life and or ministry that you think I need to be growing in, please tell me. Don't talk to someone else about it, tell me. Some people don't need a lot of encouragement to tell you, is that right? They tell you. But Paul says that the person who started a good work in us is committed to completing it. So none of us have made it yet. We're all on the journey of growing. And last time we met, we talked about, and it helps if it's on, or Aaron fixes it.
Give me 2 seconds.
Do you remember what we talked about last time? Emotional intelligence. There we go. And we had a look at mainly the self-awareness box. So we'll do a little review. Thank you, Aaron. We'll do a little review, but there are 4 domains. There's the self-awareness, the self-management, the social awareness, and the relationship management. And the start is knowing ourselves well. And I think we had this slide up last time as well, when Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom. Solomon says the fear or the reverence for the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. David was a great guy, did some lousy things, but he was called a man after God's own heart. And I wonder whether it's because of this prayer. He probably regularly prayed, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, and if there's any offensive way in me, I want you to lead me in the way everlasting. That's a great prayer to pray regularly, because we all have some things that aren't quite matching up to what they need to be. Isn't that true? So search me, O God, know my heart. See if there's any offensive way and lead me in the way everlasting. And Paul said, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought, but have a realistic view, one of the translations says. Or think of yourself with sober judgment. Have a realistic view. So self-awareness is not only the starting point in a leader's development, but it also needs to be the continuing and ongoing commitment on the part of any person who wants to have a leadership role. So if we're going to lead ourselves well, we need to make sure that we grow in our self-awareness. And a self-aware person has clarity on their values. We're going to look at that next time, about what our values are. But we have clarity on our values and sense of purpose. We know our strengths. We don't brag about our strengths, but simply operate in them. And tonight we're going to have a think for a little while about some of our strengths. The third thing is that we know whether we're battery powered or solar powered. I don't know whether you've heard that term, but some people feel energised on their own. Other people feel energised when they're with others. Do you know whether you're solar powered or battery powered?
Couldn't you be both?
Could you be both?
Yeah, you could.
That time on our own is important as well as time with others. A third one, and part of that too, is whether we're internal processes or external processes. Do we like to process things before we share them? Or do we share things and in the process of sharing, we clarify what's going on? People who are external processors need to up front say to others, don't take as gospel everything that I say as soon as I say it, because I might change my mind in 5 minutes. But they're external processes. They need to talk it out so that they get to know what they really think. Do you think about that? How many of you are internal processes and how many external? Do some of you like to talk internal? Internal? Okay. What about external? You like to talk it out with someone? Okay, a few. Okay.
You can also be a mixture of that.
You can be a mixture of that?
Then if you like that, you're very, well, who I external talk to is.
You choose the people you
You
talk
choose
to.
carefully the people that you talk to if you're an external processor, yeah. Because some people will jump to conclusions. If you say something, they'll go away and say that this person said that, but you're only thinking about what you're going to come down on rather than, yeah.
It's also then hard if how do you know that what someone's saying, if they're an external processor, is their conclusion or is their processing?
Well, that's where some external processors in my world say, do you mind if we spend some time talking about this rather than you take the first thing I say as the final thing? So it's important, I reckon, for an external processor to actually be wise about who you process with, but they ought to be people who don't feel that they're going to lock you in to the first thing that you say. And when you're on a board or a leadership team, you need to get to know each other so that if Aaron is an external processor and he says something, don't necessarily think that's the last word on it. So, yeah, does that make sense? Okay, self-aware people also understand their weaknesses and they're willing to say, look, I'm not strong in that area. I might have told you this, but I might have told you this last time, but one of my teachers told me that my drawings were worse than useless. And I feel scarred for the rest. No, I don't really. But one of my teachers said, your drawings are worse than useless. And I've been married twice. Jenny, my first wife, died in 2009 and I was married again 8 years later. Didn't think I would be. But I'm really glad that Jenny and Julia have been fantastic on aesthetics. And if they say the colour of this room ought to be red, I say fantastic, go with it. So I know that I'm not great in that area, and the people who are part of our church, our staff team, know that I'm not great in that area, so they make adjustments for that. And I acknowledge, don't ask me about that because that's not my strength. We know our limits as well, and we all have them.
Nothing's ever useless. It can always be used as a bad example.
Yeah, exactly right. Thank you. I feel much better now. Self-aware people know their limits and they are willing to recognise and understand the things that contribute to those limits. They know when to do their best work. Some people say they're night owls and they do their best work at night. Other people are up at the crack of dawn or before dawn. This one's not. And they do their best work then. So know your limits and make sure you operate. In other words, do your most important work when you're at your best. Self-aware people don't let a bad day, or they tune into their own emotions. They recognise and understand their moods and the impact that their moods have on others. Self-aware people don't let a bad day or a frustrating day spill out on others. They don't make other spouses, family, team, congregants pay when they're having a bad day. Instead, they recognise it, they pray about it, they regulate it, they chat it over appropriately and think more of others than themselves. So, if we're going to lead ourselves well, we need to know ourselves. How well do you know yourself is a really important first step to leading yourself well. Now, the other part of tonight is leading others to lead self. And I reckon there are 4 things that help others to lead self. Here are the 4. The first is your example. Someone mentioned that earlier when we talked about leader. The most powerful and effective method of teaching is modelling. Those of you who have children recognise sometimes when you see your children you think, oh no, they're doing just like I do. And if it's a good thing, that's great. If it's not a good thing, you feel a bit sad about that. There was a book written some years ago, and it was written by a guy called John Westerhoff III. How would you like to have a name like that? And it was entitled, Will Our Children Have Faith? And the theme of the book was, what children see modelled out, they are likely to pick up. So what is it that leaders model out? On my first day as a pastor, I was inducted on the Sunday, and the next day I was in the back hall at Sindal Baptist with a guy called Jeff Blackburn. Jeff was the senior pastor of Sindal at that time. I was the youth and young adults pastor. And Jeff was probably, he'd be 30 or 40 years my senior. And he was a bit like the father of Baptists back in those days. It was a long time ago. And here we were in the back hall at Sindal, a broom in each hand, and we were sweeping it out. It had been left in a not great state by the children or the youth the previous day. I'm sure that's not typical of Wangaratta youth and children. But he had a broom in one hand, I had a broom in another hand, and he said, Bill, this is what ministry or leadership is all about, being willing to serve. He modelled out what it was to serve. He modelled out lots of things that I have found incredibly helpful in my life. I'm glad I had a mum and dad who modelled that faith was related to every aspect of life. What are you modelling? Because one of the most powerful methods of influencing others to lead themselves is how and what you model. The second thing is your growth. It's inspiring when you see someone grow, isn't it? And we're going to look at a passage in a minute where Paul talks about the significance of continuing to grow. The third one is feedback. I reckon feedback is the breakfast of champions. Who gives you feedback that it helps you grow and helps you be alert to things that need to continue to be developed in your life? And Kimberly Smith, one of my colleagues, is going to be here, I think, not next time, but the next time, and doing a whole night on giving and receiving feedback. It's a great session. You don't want to miss it. It's really important for work situations, home situations, church situations. You don't want to miss that night. And the fourth thing is accountability. If no one keeps me accountable, then every decision or every responsibility is mine. But if I know that someone is, like half an hour before this tonight, I had someone message me and ask me about this because they were praying for me. And I know that they will be asking me how it went. Who keeps you accountable? And if we're going to help others grow, then we have to be in accountable relationships. If we're going to help others lead themselves well, we need to be in accountable relationships. Here's a quote by a lady called Ruth Haley Barton. She writes some terrific stuff. We've got to pay attention to what's going on in our own soul. Most of us enter into leadership believing it's our gifts, skills, competencies and training that other people are looking for. While all of these are important, the most important thing we bring to leadership is our own personal transforming self. Whatever is changing and transforming to the glory of God will find its way to the edges of our organisation. But here's the sobering flip side. Whatever is dysfunctional and untransformed within us will also find its way to the edges of our organisation and eventually affect everything. You'll wind up bringing pain and deformation to the culture and thus the organisation instead of the light of Christ. On my way up here today, I had a call from another pastor, and in our conversation, it followed up a call from yesterday. There's someone in their church who is creating a toxic environment, and it needs to be addressed because what we tolerate limits the effectiveness of what we do. So we need to have the crucial conversations when there is something that is not right. And so I talked with this other pastor about, so how are we going to tackle this in order to address it in a loving way and a constructive way? Because the other person who's doing this, God loves them and they love God. But there are some things that they're doing that aren't that helpful. So what do we do? Paul's reflection to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, he says, it's really important to keep watch over yourself. In other words, lead yourself well, care for yourself, and keep watch over all the flock of which the Spirit has made you overseers. So there's a responsibility to lead myself well, and then we have a responsibility to help others lead themselves well. And then he's writing to Timothy, who became the leader of the church in Ephesus, and he says this, train yourself to be godly. Whose responsibility is it? Yours. So if you're going to be godly, don't blame the pastor, don't blame another leader. If you're going to be godly, it's my responsibility to train myself to be godly, and it's yours. Set an example for the believers in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Speech is our conversation. How do we speak? Are we setting an example in the way we speak? Or are we a bit loose with our language? Do we build up or do we tear down? How's the language going for you? In terms of our conduct or our daily life, when people watch the way we live, is that an example? Because our example is an influence. The most powerful method of teaching is modelling. In love, in our relationships, do people know? See, love as it's defined in 1 Corinthians says that I'm going to be absolutely committed to your welfare. So do the people in my relationships know that I'm absolutely committed to their welfare and building them up? In faith, in other words, our connection with and trust in God and the way my life reflects His. And in purity, moral life, sexuality, motives, saying no to temptation and yes to God. And Paul goes on to say, be diligent in these matters and give yourself how much to them? Wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. Now that's a really interesting twist, because leaders often are concerned about the progress in the people who follow, and that's important. But Paul says here, make sure that everyone can see your progress. Now that's a really interesting thing. At the end of the year, for you to ask people who know you well, how have you seen me grow this year? It's a good question, isn't it? And then he goes on to say, watch your life and doctrine closely, persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. An interesting thing for a leader, if we persevere in leading ourselves well, then that influences how others will lead themselves. So, the way that people see us live and grow is more impacting than anything I say. Let me say that again. The way that people see me live and grow is more impacting than anything that I say. I remember I often at the end of a message, I will go to the door and shake people's hands. In fact, hang around in the lobby beforehand and in the lobby afterwards and greet people. And this particular Sunday, I said to our congregation, today I'm not going to be at the door for more than 5 minutes because we are hosting a neighbourhood barbecue today at home. And so I'm only going to be there for 5 minutes and I'm going home to set up for the barbecue. And the first person out said, Bill, what you modelled there is more impacting than anything that you said in that message. What you model impacts people more than what you say. And you must constantly observe and measure and manage yourself. And if you do this well, Paul says you will save both yourselves and your hearers. That's pretty encouraging, isn't it? So we're going to look tonight at 4 areas of leading self and help others to lead, if we're going to help others to lead self well. But before we do that, is there any question out of anything that we've said so far? What are you thinking when you hear what I say? What are you going to take home out of what we've looked at already? What's a take home for you?
To model well.
Yep.
Can I also ask a question? Because I get a bit confused about that last sentence, how one in one's actions can actually save someone else.
Yep. I think Paul was saying the impact of your life will help someone else come to know and trust their life to Jesus. So he's not saying that I can save you, but I think he's saying that the impact of the model that I'm giving helps someone else get to the point where they say, if that's what life can be like, then I want that. It's a bit like living questionably. Now, I don't mean by living questionably that you live in a way that people wonder who you are. I'm thinking living questionably in a way that people can't but ask questions like, how do you respond like that? Or why did you respond like that? Or what gives you the peace of mind to be calm in that situation? So live in a way that causes people to be curious.
I think the seeing, so that everyone may see your progress,
Yeah.
requires a level of vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Because I think everyone wants to present a version of themselves that is complete, that is together, that is with it, but actually it's in the vulnerable areas of your weaknesses even,
Yeah.
letting people sometimes experiencing those and then seeing you grow in those
Yeah.
is the example that might get them to question more about, well, how did you do that? And how
Yeah.
can I grow like that? So I think being prepared to be vulnerable is a massive key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Transparency about how life is for us and being willing to acknowledge, I actually need your help to pray for me too and to help me grow. Yeah. What else? What else comes to mind as you think about what we've shared already?
I think that it's important to keep checking that too. Like it's easy to go, oh yeah, I've done, personality or value, activities before, but that it needs to be an ongoing thing to keep checking
Yeah.
where you're at in those things.
Yeah. My wife Julia and I facilitate a marriage course regularly, and last year, I think it was, we had some people who'd been married for 60 years on the marriage course. And they said towards the end of the course, this has been so helpful for us because we had started to drift in some of our care for each other. And it's prompted us about the importance. Now I'm thinking, 60? Haven't you got it sorted yet? But I love the fact that they are committed to growing 60 years in. That's great, isn't it? So yeah, great point. So here are the 4 areas that we're going to look at briefly tonight. The first is character. And while you don't need all the gifts that exist in the world, you do need all aspects of character while you're putting your gifts to work. And there's lots of things that we could talk about here, but I just want to talk about 4 of them. The first is connecting authentically, which we will pick up in more detail next time we meet it, but it picks up Aaron's point. Are we authentic in the way we present? Do people think when you say something, oh, I don't know whether that's true, or what they say doesn't match up with the way they live or act? So how do we connect authentically? And the second part there is committed to the truth about the world, about ourselves and about others. In other words, we welcome and grow through feedback. And again, we'll pick that up later in the year with Kimberly. The third part of character is committed to, have you heard about the DWYSYWD? Do what you say you will do. Do what you say you will do. Have you ever had anyone say to you, oh, we must catch up, and then you don't hear from them?
Oh, that
Happens all the time.
well,
It's an aspect of character. Do you mean what you say? Do what you say you will do. People who don't do what they say they will do will not earn the trust of others, and they will not be trusted to accept different responsibilities. Do what you say you will do. Write that on the back of the toilet door. Well, on a piece of paper on the back of the toilet door, or on the fridge. It's a great thing to remember. It builds trust. Do what you say you will do. It's all about character.
so basically, if you need to be, as it says, they're committed to that, because so many people
Yeah.
say, yep, we'll do that, but we'll do that, and then it either doesn't happen,
Yeah.
or, and it can be a bit frustrating sometimes when that happens.
Can be very frustrating. Yeah.
They make promises you can't deliver.
Yeah.
True.
It
Yeah.
speaks of your integrity as well.
It does. Yep. I have a friend who was going for a very responsible job, and someone said to him, I know that you've got the ability to do this. Are you sure you've got the character to do it? And it was a really helpful reminder about the fact that character is foundational to any leadership responsibility that we have. So, how's your character? And the fourth aspect of character here is that we're committed to embrace and engage and deal with the negative, which means that we're willing to say, if there's a problem, we're going to face up to it. If there's an elephant in the room, we're going to deal with it. We're not going to try and push it under the carpet. Is there something we're tolerating that limits our effectiveness? Do we need to tackle it? And then we're committed to resolving it and to transforming it. The pastor that I was mentioning to you that was on the phone today was committed to say we're going to deal with it, and they've got a meeting tonight to work out a way forward with it. An aspect of character is not to push aside or push under the carpet something that needs addressing. You know when you're driving and the red light comes on your dashboard? How do you get rid of that? You could get a hammer and just smash it. But that won't deal with it. A red light on the dashboard is an alert that something needs addressing. And our character is demonstrated by our willingness to face reality and deal with it. And if we're going to lead others to lead themselves well, here's an area that we need to be modelling. Someone has said that crucial conversations are moments of extraordinary influence. Which crucial conversations are you not having that you need to have, or that you're not having well? This is in this area of committed to embrace, engage with and deal with the negative, which leads to ending problems or finding solutions to them, resolving them or transforming them. Another area that helps us impact others and helps others to lead self well is understanding ourselves and relating to others. So 5 ways to discover your shape. Have a look around the room. Do you see anyone else who's exactly the same shape as you? Hope not.
No one's quite as attractive as me. That's unfortunate.
Because we're all uniquely shaped, aren't we? And the reality is that God has shaped each of us uniquely for the work that He's created for us to do. You know that beautiful verse in Ephesians 2 where it says we are God's masterpiece? I don't know whether you've grasped that, but every one of us is a masterpiece of God, created in Christ Jesus for good works which He has prepared in advance for us to do. So, to find out our shape for those good works is a really helpful exercise, and you can Google shape spiritual gifts assessment or something like that, and you find some little tests to do it. So we're going to take each of the letters of shape, S-H-A-P-E, and S stands for spiritual gifts. Now, in the Bible, there's a whole list of spiritual gifts, and it's great to do a little exercise and see which spiritual gift or gift mix you might have. Some people say, is that an exhaustive list? What do you think? No? We've got a no here.
Probably your dominant areas.
Dominant areas. I reckon that if God is a creative God and He wants to create another gift or two, He could probably do it. But here's a good list to start with. And it's, what am I gifted to do? You know, when you do something and people feed back to you, that was amazing. And you think, well, I don't know whether it was amazing, but they say, when you did that, it really impacted other people. That's probably a hint about an area of spiritual giftedness. H stands for heart or passion. If you could make a difference anywhere, where would you want to make the difference? Just turn to your neighbour. We're going to take a minute or two. Turn to a neighbour or a couple of neighbours and just answer that question. If you could make a difference anywhere, where would you want to make it? You've got 3 minutes, so don't preach a sermon. Just talk to the person next to you. If you could make a difference anywhere, where would you like to do it?
Where or how would you do it? You're saying it, or excuse me. We want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Is it internally, or is it sort of
Anywhere.
anywhere?
Yeah.
Right.
Could be internally or it could be...
Well, what if we think that what we're doing already is okay and we don't want a difference? Is
That's
that
okay. Tell each other
No,
that.
but I'm just saying, is that being, sort of putting your head in the sand,
Not
so
at
to
all.
speak?
No.
No, I'm asking you. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Is that 2 minutes? 3 minutes? So, is anyone brave enough to tell us where you want to make a difference? Could be where you are making a difference already. Who's brave enough to tell us? Someone from this side. Grandchildren. Yeah, fantastic. Grandchildren. What about someone here? Teenagers? Yeah, terrific. This side? The government.
I was aiming high. Yes, we can only pray for them.
Now, the interesting thing is that you might have, for example, the gift of encouragement or the gift of teaching, but where you exercise that gift might be different. Imagine if you're a teacher and that was a gift that God's given you, and one of you said, I actually want to teach children. So it might be the same gift, but a different area. Or it might be adults or teenagers or people who have disabilities. So The spiritual gift tells you what I'm gifted to do. The H, the heart or the passion, tells you where God might want you to do it. The A stands for abilities, the things that you do well and what comes naturally. You know, some people don't know which end of a hammer to hold, and other people are really good at that. It just seems to come naturally. Other people practice and practice and practice on the piano and it sounds wooden, whereas others just sit down and play away. And so there are some natural abilities that we have. A fourth one is P stands for personal style. Are we people-oriented or task-oriented? When a meeting is finished, some people just talk to each other and other people pack up. And sometimes the packing up people think, why don't those other people help? And sometimes the people who are talking to others think, why do people just have to pack up? Why can't they talk to other people? Well, we're different. And some people have a personal style that's task-oriented. Other people, a personal style that's people-oriented. Some people are internal processes like we talked about. Others are external processes. We have different personalities and we engage differently. And then the final one is an E for experience. What have been your experiences spiritually or painfully or educationally or work-wise or ministry-wise? Because those experiences God wants to use to help others going through the same sort of thing. My younger brother had 3 boys and the youngest boy died at 9 weeks. Really sad, cot death. And I've watched over the years the way my brother and his wife have been able to relate to people in a similar situation in a way that I can't. As I mentioned, my wife Jenny died at 53 after a battle with cancer and MS. And I am amazed at the way that opportunities have opened up for me to engage with people. And I often hear people say, you understand what I'm going through. Now, I don't know exactly what they're going through, but they feel like the experience that I've had helps me relate. And the experiences we each have, you know, there's a verses in 2 Corinthians where it says that praise to God, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who helps us in our troubles so that the help that we receive, we can use to help others in their troubles. So our shape for ministry, or our shape for leadership, or our shape for influence can be summarised like this: spiritual gifts, heart or passion, abilities, personal style, experience. I want you to turn to your friend again, your neighbour or neighbours, and just identify some experience that you've had that somehow God has used in helping others in a similar experience. So take a minute to do that. Okay. Who's brave enough to tell us briefly of an experience?
Only with when I got my breast cancer.
Yeah.
Someone said to me, "Where do you see God in all this?"
Mm.
And I was able to say with absolute conviction, I believe He prepared me for it.
Yeah, great.
So, stop it. So it meant that I was able to deal with it in a more positive way and express that to other people, because you get into sympathy, you know. And I remember talking to someone else at church, and she said she had this, this, and this, and someone said, "Why you?" And she said, "Well, why not me?"
Mm.
And that's also something that you can, you know, it's not, God doesn't choose what you're going to have and what you're going to have. It's just, you know, it's your lot, and you deal with it,
Yeah.
you know, the best way you can. And I remember that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And can I just say, there's a transparency about being willing to share about some of those things, because some people say, I'm going to keep it to myself, but it's amazing the way that when people are willing to share a little of what's going on, that opens opportunities for God to use you in the lives of others.
Even if it's to pray for someone.
Exactly.
You know, someone can come to you, and my mum was a great person for prayer. I'd ring her up and go, you know, what's going on? She said, "Never mind, darling, I'll pray for you."
Mm.
And that was my encouragement, my peace of mind, that
Yeah.
mum had me,
Yeah.
you know, in prayer. And I think that's something that, you know, I've learned from mum as well.
Yeah,
through that
great.
experience, yeah.
Someone else? Pauline?
My mother died when she was 55 and I was 19, and she died suddenly, so it was a matter of having to work through, and I think that has helped me in giving me some empathy and understanding
Great.
what other people
Yeah.
go through sometimes in a similar situation.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. I can see it's on someone else's lips, about ready to open, to tell me. Yeah.
I meet with some guys up in Ryde of a Friday morning, and most of the guys go to church, but there's one guy there that goes to church but he never reads his Bible, so I'm hoping to be able to read the Bible with him
Yeah.
at some stage.
Fantastic. So it's an interesting thing. I'm hoping to be able to read the Bible sometime with him. I wonder whether there's an opportunity to simply say, you know, this week I've been reading something in the scripture or in the Bible that just blew me away. You probably do that anyway.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of thing that rouses curiosity. Jesus was a master at arousing curiosity, wasn't he? He asked, do you know that he asked about 330 questions that we have recorded in the Bible? He asked way more questions than he gave answers. And I reckon one of the reasons was he wanted to arouse curiosity. And do you know that he didn't finish some parables? Like, I want to know whether that older son ever sorted things out or not. And why didn't Jesus tell us that? Because he wants us to answer the question, because we could be the older brother. He didn't finish some things. Well, we don't have it recorded that he did. Let me just say something else about this shape. It's one thing for you to identify your shape, but it's really affirming if you invite others to say, hey, listen, I think that I'm shaped this way, but I'd love your feedback about whether that's the way that you see me. Because if others are able to give you feedback, that affirms, well, maybe God has gifted me this way, shaped me this way, and I can be used that way. So it's a gift for you to be able to be specific. I don't want to pinch Kimberly's stuff on feedback, but if it's worth saying once, it's worth saying again, isn't it? And be specific about the feedback that you give. Did we touch briefly on this last time? I'm not sure. But it's called Widget, and Patrick Lencioni is the guy who did it. You know, when you're in teams, some people in teams seem to be able to dream of what could be done. They can't, they're wondering, I wonder whether we could do this. And other people, I reckon we could perhaps do it this way or this way. And then there's those who help to analyse what's the best way, they're the discerners. And then the galvanisers, they're starting to mobilise people. Let me just, so wonder, you see the potential. Invention, you see the ideas. Discernment, you assess the ideas. Galvanising, you rally others to act on the ideas. Enablement, you bring ideas to life. And tenacity, you push ideas to completion. Do you know some people who say, I'm someone who's got some great ideas and I get things going, but try to finish them. Whereas others are like dogs with a bone. They say, we actually got to finish this. And we work together as a team, and when we're working together as a team, I don't know who you barrack for in the AFL, but if you don't have a team and you want a really good team, the Hawks. Go for the Hawks. But it's amazing the way that different people on that team have different roles to play. And when we're working as a team, no wonder Paul talks about the fact that the church is the body of Christ. Not everyone's an ear or an eye or a toe or an arm. We all have different roles to play. And this is a helpful, and you can get surveys to go through this sort of thing, helps you identify how you can encourage somebody else to lead well. Because if I'm in a job that's not suited to the way I'm wired or shaped, it's frustration, isn't it? Find a role that you can play well and that others can complement you in. The third area for leading self that will impact and help others to lead well is personal management. Did we talk about the big rocks last time? We did? Some of you weren't here last time. But it's a story, a guy called Stephen Covey tells the story where he has this huge jar. And into the jar he puts fist-sized rocks so that it's up to the top of the jar. And he says to the people who are there, "Is it full?" And they say, "Yes, it is." He said, "No, it's not." And from under the table, he brings out a jug of gravel. And he pours the gravel in until it's up to the top. And he says, "Is it full?" And they say, "Yes, it is." He says, "No, it's not." And he pulls out a jug of sand and he pours the sand in until it's up to the top. And he says, "Is it full?" And they've cottoned on by this stage and they say, "No, it's not full." And he says, "You're right." And he pulls out a jug of water and he pours the water until it's up to the top. And then he says, "So what's the moral of the story?" And some bright spark says, "You can always fit more in your life." And he says, that's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is that if you put the same amount of gravel, sand and water in first, you won't be able to fit the big rocks in. So the moral of the story is to fit the big rocks in first. So the question is, what are the big rocks in your life? Some years ago, I did a little exercise on, I prayed, I read scripture, I talked to others, I did a lot of reflection and came up with what I reckon are the big rocks for my life. What are the things that God specially wants me to be doing? And I came up with 7. And those 7 need to be reflected in my diary or calendar, because if they're not, I won't be able to fit them in because other things will crowd in. There's still plenty of room in a week if those big rocks are in place and I can put gravel, sand and water in. But if I don't have the big rocks in there, the rest of life crowds in. And having the big rocks in your diary helps you know what to say yes to and what to say no to. And you can say to people, I can see that that's a really important thing. At the moment, I'm not in a position to respond to it. So, if we're going to lead self well in a way that helps others lead well, we need to be thinking about how do we manage our time. Yeah, there's a book by a guy called Carey Nieuwhof that's called At Your Best. If you want to work hard at personal management, that's a really helpful book. And basically his thesis is there are times in every day where you're at your best. And make sure you do your best work when you're at your best. And there'll be time for other things, but make sure you do your best work. And here's another area of personal management, and it's one that I think lots of us struggle with. You know that there are many thoughts, hundreds of thoughts that come into our minds every day. And Paul gives us a clue to demolishing strongholds. In 2 Corinthians, he says, take your thoughts captive to make them obedient to Christ. You can't stop a thought coming in. And have you noticed that if you have a thought that's unhelpful and you say to yourself, I must stop thinking that, what happens? You think about it more. So it's better to grab that thought, to take it captive, because God already knows what you're thinking. And say, God, this is what I'm thinking, but I'm absolutely committed to doing whatever you want me to do with that thought. So rather than say, I mustn't think that, it's way better to say, this is what I'm thinking, God, but I'm committed to do what you want. And Solomon has the encouragement, above all else, guard your heart. It's the wellspring of life. Because there are things that can creep into our thought life and our heart that can wreak havoc. So we need to guard those things. Have you seen this? All of us have a wellness reservoir or a wellness tank. And when it's up to the top, it's full and we're resilient. Like we can take on the world. When things crowd in on us, sometimes the wellness reservoir goes down and it might get down near the bottom. Question for you, what do you think fills your tank? Just call it out. What fills your tank?
Happiness.
Happiness? What else? Love? Creativity? Gospel? Music? Music?
We're on the same page.
Yeah. What else fills your tank? Nature. Relationships with other people?
Helping people.
Helping people fills your tank. Great. Family? No one's mentioned coffee. Any other things that fill your tank? The kids at work? Yeah. Exercise. Not everyone's tank.
A different tank.
Friendships.
Yeah.
Reading God's Word.
Having a good night's sleep.
Yeah, really important. Okay, so there's a whole range of things, and you've dealt with, you've mentioned numbers of them. But there's some of the things that fill my tank. Notice the second one from the bottom, dealing with stressors. If you don't deal with things that stress you, it drains you. But if you do deal with them, even though it might be hard to deal with them, it actually fills your tank. Okay, so what drains your tank? Stress, conflict, being anxious, problem solving drains, yeah. Family problems, bureaucracy, paperwork, staring at a screen.
Christians talking too much about footy.
Are you talking to me?
I'm from Sydney. I'm coming down here. It's just every conversation's about football.
Okay.
We'll have to talk, we'll have to talk more often because I can't stand it.
So here's some things that, do you notice that family is on both? Because family can breathe life into us, but family can also drain, can't it?
Drains as well.
Yeah. Sometimes work breathes life into us, sometimes work drains us. Now, the drain at the bottom can actually widen during times of stress. And when the drain at the bottom widens, what happens to the reservoir? It goes down.
Quicker.
And if you're going to survive during that time, what do you need to do? Block it. Well, you can block it, or you need to make sure that what's coming in at the top is actually increased as well. And the tendency when we're under stress or there's a lot of draining stuff goes on, the tendency is to stop filling. But that doesn't work. So if we had to ask the question today, what's the level of your wellness tank? Take a minute to talk to the people next to you. And just talk about, if you had to identify, is it up to the top? Is it halfway down, a third of the way down? Where is it and what's draining it at the minute? Just take a minute to talk to your friend next to you.
Well, yes, at the moment it's drained. Yes, yes. Yes, that's right. Yep, yep. Yeah. Absolutely. And yet, over the last few days, well, that's family.
Okay. 4 areas of leading self well in order to help us lead others well. The first one was character. How's your character? Because character is basic to all that we do if we're going to be leading others as well as leading ourselves. The second one was understanding ourselves and the way we operate, the role that we can have relating to others as well. The third is personal management. And the final one, just briefly, is spiritual disciplines. I had a ride in a taxi some years ago. I was going from the airport in Perth to a conference that I was involved in, and I had an Ethiopian taxi driver. And I said to him, what is it about you guys in Kenya and Ethiopia that you run so well? What's the clues? And he gave me some life-giving disciplines around exercise and around diet and around altitude and competition, like people who push you. And it was interesting talking to him. And I reckon disciplines are life-giving practices that help us keep our eyes on Jesus and his perspectives, that help us grow, equip us for the challenges, and enable us to embrace life well. Discipline, some people think is a dirty word. I think it's a life-giving rhythm. What are the disciplines or the life-giving rhythms that you have? And it helps us be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and in partnership with Jesus do what he did. Do you know that invitation of Jesus? If you're worn out from trying to do it on your own, come walk with me. Work with me. Notice he doesn't say work for me. He says work with me. Watch how I do it and learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Oh man, that's the way I want to live. That is the way I want to live, and the way to do that is to walk with Jesus. And it's interesting as we think about those things, what are some of the possible life-giving rhythms? Now, here are some, you might have different ones, but here's some that I find helpful. Start and spend days with the restorer of our souls and end the day by entrusting yourself to his care. Like, one of the things I do often before I roll out of bed is to say something like, Lord, this is a new day. And I'm thankful for the day. And I know that you've got some special things planned for today. Would you mind if I got involved with you in some of them? Start the day with the restorer of your soul. The second thing is to spend the day walking with him. It took about 3 hours to get here today. And if I had someone in the car with me and I didn't speak to them the whole way, they'd probably say, how rude. How many hours a day do we spend without consulting the one who lives in us by his Spirit? Wouldn't it be good to just say from time to time, thanks, Lord, that you're with me. I need a bit of wisdom here. I don't know what to do here, but would you mind giving me some help here? Or this person's rubbing me up the wrong way. I want to respond helpfully. I need your grace to do that. Why don't we check in with him, running conversation through the day? And you know that prayer that Jesus prayed on the cross? Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's the sort of prayer that a parent in Jewish society would teach their kids to pray every night. Into your hands I commit my spirit. At the end of the day, look back and say, thanks for the day. I could have done a better job here. Help me to do better tomorrow with your help. And thanks that you're not going to sleep tonight, Lord. I need a good sleep. Isn't that encouraging that even in the middle of the night he's not slumbering or sleeping? A second one is to soak in the Word, listening and chatting with the restorer of our souls and partner in mission. I don't know how you soak in the Word, but Jesus said, man does not live on bread alone, but by a steady stream of words from the mouth of God. And quite frankly, some of us try to live with a cannula. You know, in hospital you have a cannula in and you're on a drip. And that's really important because it keeps you alive. But you don't want to walk around the streets with a drip in your arm, do you? And some of us wait for Sunday to get a bit of a drip feed. Let's soak in the Word. Let there be a steady stream of words from the mouth of God. It could be 5 minutes a day, just digging into the Scriptures. Lord, what do you want to say to me today? Thanks that you inspired this word. I want something from you today. Another is spend unhurried time in nature. You know, people say there are two books. There's the Bible and there's the book of creation. And the heavens declare the glory of God, and day after day they speak of his handiwork. So time in creation. You know how Jesus ducked out from the crowds from time to time? Got away? And there's exercise, there's good food, there's community, we need relationships, and there's a good night's sleep. Here's 4 questions to ponder. What am I modelling? Is it obvious that I'm growing? Do I welcome feedback and offer it helpfully to others? And who keeps me accountable? And who do I help with accountability? It's about leading self and leading others to lead self well. Can I finish with the story? Miss Thompson.
Were you listening?
Because this is about someone who was gifted, but they needed some character development, and the impact they had on others was amazing. It's a story that Tony Campolo told. Tony Campolo was an author, a pastor, a sociologist, wrote lots of books. He died last year. An amazing man, and he had a great impact on my life. And here's one of my favourite stories. And I'm going to read it as he wrote it. I know of a school teacher named Miss Thompson. Every year, when she met her new students, she would say, boys and girls, I love you all the same. I have no favourites. Of course, she wasn't being completely truthful. See that authenticity thing? She wasn't being completely truthful. Teachers do have favourites, and what's worse, most teachers have students that they just don't like. Teddy Stellard was a boy that Miss Thompson just didn't like, and for good reason. He just didn't seem interested in school. There was a deadpan blank expression on his face, and his eyes had a glassy, unfocused appearance. And when she spoke to Teddy, he always answered in monosyllables. His clothes were musty, his hair was unkempt, he wasn't an attractive boy, and he certainly wasn't likeable. Whenever she marked Teddy's papers, she got a certain perverse pleasure out of putting crosses next to the wrong answers, and when she put Fs for fail at the top of the papers, she always did it with a flair. She should have known better. She had Teddy's records, and she knew more about him than she wanted to admit. And the records read, first grade, Teddy shows promise with his work and attitude, but poor home situation. Second grade, Teddy could do better. Mother is seriously ill. He receives little help at home. Third grade, Teddy is a good boy, but too serious. He's a slow learner. His mother died this year. Fourth grade, Teddy is very slow, but well behaved. His father shows no interest. Christmas came and the boys and girls in Miss Thompson's class brought her Christmas presents. They piled their presents on her desk and crowded around to watch her open them. Among the presents there was one from Teddy Stellard. She was surprised that he'd brought her a gift, but he had. Teddy's gift was wrapped in brown paper and was held together with Scotch tape. And on the paper were written the simple words, "For Miss Thompson, from Teddy." When she opened Teddy's present, out fell a gaudy rhinestone bracelet with half the stones missing and a bottle of cheap perfume. The other boys and girls began to giggle and smirk over Teddy's gift. But Miss Thompson at least had enough sense to silence them by immediately putting on the bracelet and putting some of the perfume on her wrist. And then she held up her wrist for the other children to smell, and she said, "Doesn't it smell lovely?" And the children, taking their cue from their teacher, readily agreed with oohs and ahs. At the end of the day, when school was over and the other children had left, Teddy lingered behind. He slowly came over to her desk and said softly, Miss Thompson, you smell just like my mother. And her bracelet looks real pretty on you too. I'm glad you like my presents." When Teddy left, Miss Thompson got down on her knees and asked God to forgive her. The next day when the children came to school, they were welcomed by a new teacher. Miss Thompson had become a different person. She was no longer just a teacher, she'd become an agent of God. She was now a person committed to loving her children and doing things for them that would live on after her. She helped all the children, but especially the slow ones, and especially Teddy Stellard. By the end of that school year, Teddy showed dramatic improvement. He'd caught up with most of the students and was even ahead of some. She didn't hear from Teddy for a long time. Then one day she received a note that read, "Dear Miss Thompson, as of today, I am Theodore Stellard, MD. How about that? I wanted you to be the first to know. I'm getting married next month, the 27th to be exact. I want you to come and sit where my mother would sit if she were alive. You're the only family I have now. Dad died last year. Love, Teddy Stellard." Miss Thompson went to that wedding and sat where Teddy's mother would have sat. She deserved to sit there. She'd done something for Teddy that he would never forget. Leadership is influence. And it starts by leading yourself well and modelling what you want to be called. And if you lead yourself well, you'll help others lead themselves well. I'd love to pray with you. Our God, we thank you that you are committed to finishing the good work that you start in us. And we thank you that none of us have made it. We're all on the growth trajectory. And thank you that the choices we make today determine the stories that we tell tomorrow. And we want to walk with you. We want to work with you. And we want to watch how you do it and so learn those unforced rhythms of grace. thank you that we get the opportunity to partner with you in your mission and to be a blessing in the lives of others. And so, Lord, I pray for everyone here tonight that wherever we are, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our sporting clubs, wherever we go, in the shopping centres where we shop, help us to represent you well and help us to live wholeheartedly for you. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Thanks for the privilege of being with you.
Thank you, Bill, very much for coming up and sharing with us again. Great input. Now, for those that don't have to rush off, there's two options for you. One is all about conversation, relationship, reflection, there's supper. There's also a task. If you're interested in task things, we need to put the chairs back to Sunday. So if you can help with either or both of those two things, that would be great. If you have any questions, want to talk things more, Bill won't rush off straight away, but I'm sure has wanted to get... Are you going to go home tonight?
I am.
Okay, good. So yeah, won't be here for too long, but if you want to...